Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Lesson 2 of Unit 11, The New Deal. Our EQ for the lesson is, what was the lasting impact of the New Deal on the people and programs in South Carolina and the nation as a whole? Now, most of the time, we're going to be concentrating our efforts on how did the New Deal affect South Carolina as a whole. In this lesson, you're going to focus on four major questions. What caused the Great Depression? What were the characteristics of the Great Depression? And what were the effects of the Great Depression on South Carolina specifically? And how did the New Deal, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, help ease the symptoms of the Great Depression? So, causes of the Great Depression. What really caused the Great Depression? So, people are borrowing way too much money, and they're not being able to pay it back because they don't have enough income. We'd buy too many consumer goods, more land, more of everything, more farm equipment, or more animals. The overproduction of goods would cause the price of those goods to drop. Industries would cut back on production, which means they'd also cut back on workers. Industries would reduce the work week or laid off workers completely. This would mean a complete reduction in income for the workers. Now they're going to be unable to pay off their loans from the bank, and banks would begin to fail because they're not making money since the people couldn't pay back their loans. So we see banks closing left and right. There was no protection for the people or for the banks when the economy went horrible in 1929. Black Tuesday, probably the most famous day in the Great Depression, October 24th, 1929. The New York Stock Exchange. This is a stock market. This is where stocks or ownership in a company is exchanged, bought, sold, and traded. So everyone who owned stocks lost their money. I mean, just not a few dollars here and there, but billions of dollars back then were just lost, never to be regained. And it marked the beginning of the Great Depression, but it was not the cause of the Great Depression. That previous page really told you what the causes were. The Black Tuesday event was more of a effect of everything else happening, and with the devaluation, with the value of companies dropping, it was just going to happen. The Black Tuesday event was going to happen no matter what. Some primary document pictures of how Black Tuesday was viewed. The most interesting two pictures to me are the ones on the right-hand side. It says $100 will buy this car, must have cash, lost all the money in the stock market. And you see the other guy standing around it like, we don't have $100. And then you see in the bottom right-hand corner the shanty towns, or what was also called Hoovervilles after Herbert Hoover. These are people who became homeless, lost their jobs, lost their homes, and they would literally build these shacks in the middle of the cities. Characteristics of the Great Depression in South Carolina. We know that banks failed. Textile mills would close. Farmers lost their land. Railroads went bankrupt. 25% of our state population was unemployed. So 1 out of every 4 people did not have a job. Most people didn't have 2 dimes to rub together. Marriage and birth rates would drop. Young men would wander from town to town looking for work. These were, in a very negative way, called hobos. You also had people who rode the rails looking for work, and these guys were essentially hobos as well. Here's a song that came out during the time, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? And it really goes into detail about the feelings of what the regular people were feeling and how people felt during this time. I want you to read it through. Really pause the video and read what it's saying. Understand the lyrics. Some more primary documents of what was going on. We see soup lines and bread lines. We see a whole slew of homeless people, homeless families. Look how people are expressing themselves in the upper right-hand corner. Look how that family looks. A very famous line that we're going to see over and over. In one school, a teacher ordered the thin girl to go home and eat. very thin, like deathly thin. She said, "I can't. It's my sister's day to eat." So imagine the situation a lot of these families are put in, not being able to feed their kids every day. The peak of the unemployment of not having a job in the nation was about 30+%, while the average in between 1932 and 1933 was about 25%. Unemployment lines of the 1930s, these lines go around the block and then some in the major cities, just people looking for basic work. Now, FDR is going to kick in 1932, and the federal government is going to try and alleviate some of the issues with what he calls the New Deal to the American people. The famous line itself, "There's nothing to fear but fear itself," was a very famous quote by FDR. And he's going to have these conversations. He's going to tell the people in what we call fireside chats. And these fireside chats were radio news meetings of him talking about how he's going to help America and how America will need to help itself. The only way that we can fix ourselves is to get off our rear ends and help ourselves fix ourselves. So Roosevelt would actually seek the advice of two South Carolinians, James Burns and Mary McLeod Bethune. James Burns was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1930, where he would help FDR and the New Deal legislation get passed. He'd serve as a very important policy advisor to FDR. He'd actually advise FDR on how to handle the New Deal and the Great Depression. Later on, in 1941, he was appointed to the highest court in America, to the Supreme Court. Mary McLeod Bethune would serve as the National Counsel to Negro Women, but also a very influential woman on FDR's Black Cabinet, which was an unofficial cabinet of advisors to the Great Depression and how to help African Americans during this time. New Deal programs in South Carolina. So there's a lot of programs that are going to pop up at this time, but there are some specific ones that we'll focus in on. The CCC, or Civilian Conservation Corps, would employ young men to work in national and state parks. 17 state parks were built in South Carolina by the CCC, including Hunting Island, Paris Mountain, Oconee State Park, Table Rock, Poinsett, and Myrtle Beach. So all these were built with federal monies, giving jobs to young men to help employ them, to help rise the economy up. Here's a primary document, a poster, the CCC on young man's opportunity to work, to live, to learn, to build. Myrtle Beach State Park, another one built by the CCC. The other one that would serve as a huge effect on South Carolina was the Social Security Act. It would provide old age pensions, so essentially like retirement accounts funded by the federal government. Here's some primary documents of it. The PWA and the WPA are going to help build projects and made lasting improvements to society. So the PWA and the WPA, the Public Works Administration and Works Progress Administration, both would build lasting projects for not only South Carolina, but also the nation as a whole. Schools, libraries, courthouses, highways, playgrounds, hospitals, airports, bridges are all going to be built by this federal administration. As we see here, we see two pictures as well as a document, a poster, ready to serve, trained efficient workers. So the WPA is going to train people on how to work. They're going to retrain society on certain jobs. The Santee Cooper Electricity Project, which is the largest New Deal program in South Carolina, would build dams on the Santee and Cooper rivers, creating Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie. These dams would produce hydroelectric power that improved the living conditions for thousands of South Carolinians. Before these two projects were completed, many South Carolinians did not have electricity. So imagine not living without electricity. and then living with it, and what a drastic change that would have on your lifestyle. The Santee Cooper project map, as we see here, and who it helped out. Here's the Santee Cooper electricity project underway. As you can see, they cut down a lot of trees because that region is going to be flooded out by the lake itself. The REA Act, the Rural Electrification Act, would bring electricity to many farms and rural regions of South Carolina. By 1940, 25% of the farms in South Carolina would have electricity. And I know that seems low, but before that, it was less than 1% of the farms in South Carolina actually had electricity. An ad for electricity in the upper left-hand corner, and then we see a woman cooking in the 1930s over an electric stove. But not only was it the electric stove, but the refrigerator, which would provide electricity to the home. The NRA, not the National Riflemen's Association, but the National Recovery Act, would control prices for consumers. It would set the hours and wages for workers. However, it did not control the speed up and stretch out methods that textile mills would use to get more product out of people. And it did not guarantee a 40-hour work week for workers. Sometimes it was more hours, sometimes it was a lot less hours. Now, during the 1930s and right before World War II, the labor unrest is really going to rise up. People are going to want fair working conditions. They're going to want fair pay. So since the government did not help the wages and the working conditions, many mill workers in the South, especially in South Carolina, are going to join labor unions. And these unions will call for all members to go on strike. Now, a strike, if you don't know what one is they're going to refuse to go to work until better wages and or better working conditions are agreed upon. Violence would actually break out in Honiopath, South Carolina in 1934. 7 striking workers were killed and several others were injured when South Carolina police fired shots onto angry mobs. President Roosevelt would ask the labor unions and management to enter into arbitration, arbitration is nothing more than discussing their differences and coming to some sort of conclusion. The workers wanted to do this, but management refused. Since the strike was ineffective, it led to the collapse of labor unions in South Carolina. South Carolina is still a right-to-work state to where labor unions basically have no power. How did the New Deal legislation help workers? Well, one, the New Deal established a minimum wage. So when we think about the minimum wage today, it was established back then. It established the maximum number of working hours, and as well as if you did work over 40 hours a week, then you're paid overtime, unless you're a salaried employee like school teachers are, to where even if we work 60, 70, 80 hours a week, we don't see overtime. The New Deal also recognized the right for workers to form labor unions and to bargain for better working conditions as well as salary. Now, the New Deal had a lasting impact on the nation and South Carolina. It created thousands and thousands of jobs, which would help ease the economic hardship, and it would pump millions of dollars into the economy. However, the New Deal did not end the Great Depression. It also did not help African Americans as much as it helped whites. And as we all should know by now, the Great Depression ended when the U.S. entered World War II. This concludes Lesson 2. Go back, view the primary documents, and understand what the New Deal actually did.